Thank you all so much for joining today. It's great to see different folks from different disciplines joining from across the country. I really appreciate y'all taking the time. Um, like Anna said, I got my start in this field working at JWI, and I used to manage the National Alliance. So it is a real treat for me to be back and be the one talking. So that's great, and thanks for having me. So like Anna said, I do training on stalking all across the country for audiences including victim service providers, law enforcement, campus professionals, mental health practitioners, judicial officers, really anyone on the victim service and or criminal justice side of recognizing and responding to stalking. And I usually start by asking this question, which Anna, if you could launch as a poll, and that's, have you had the opportunity to attend a training specifically on the topic of stalking? So not one where stalking was mentioned, but one that was like, we are just talking stalking today. And I'm not seeing the poll, but let me know if you are.
The poll is launched, and
Okay.
people have been filling it out.
Okay, great. Okay,
So
well,
everyone has filled it out so far. 54% said no, this is my first one. 34% said yes, 1 to 2 trainings, and 11% said yes, several.
okay, great. Thanks. So what you're telling me is over half folks on the call, it's their first stalking training. And not that you aren't special because you are, but that is fairly typical. Usually half to the whole room haven't had the chance to attend stalking training previously. And that's not a reflection of anyone as a professional or individual, but it is a reflection that stalking is very undertrained in our field. And we want to remember there are four major crimes under the Violence Against Women Act. It's domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. But it's always kind of like and stalking. Like we almost call their website andstalking.org. Because so often it's like, oh yeah, and stalking. That's kind of in the mix with the other stuff that we talk about. But the reality is that stalking is a prevalent victimization that stands on its own as a traumatic crime, as well as one that often intersects with other forms of interpersonal violence. It is criminal, traumatic, dangerous, and yet it's really under-resourced. When you think about it, there is no national stalking hotline. There are few, if any, standalone stalking crisis centers. So it often falls to folks like you who are usually primarily focused on intimate partner and sexual violence to kind of add stalking on. And I'm not saying that's fair or easy because y'all are already busy and have plenty of work to do without adding stalking on. But I am saying it's really important because these survivors really have nowhere else to go. So look, you're the ones doing the work every day. You know how to do what you do. My hope's just by the end of the session, you kind of move that and stalking a little more to the beginning of the sentence and see some of the work that you're already doing through that lens with some new tools, strategies, and ideas. And of course, there's no one expert on stalking. I don't claim to be that. And so you're the ones on the ground doing the work. So don't hesitate to share in the chat, obviously with victim confidentiality in mind, but examples of what you're seeing, what's working, what's not working, um, what you've seen come up in your work. Right. So I am from the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center, and we are the technical assistance provider on stalking, which is a fancy way of saying that we're here to help the helpers and y'all are the helpers. And so we provide training, create resources. If you're working on a stalking case and want to talk it over with someone, you can call us. We're usually free of charge because that's our job to help y'all out. Our website, which I'll refer to throughout the day, it's stalkingawareness.org. There we have practitioner guides, and those are broken out by discipline. So we have a section for victim services, for law enforcement, for judicial officers, for campus professionals, for healthcare providers, and so on. We also have a section for awareness educators, and if you or anyone in your agency is doing any sort of awareness education on, say, healthy relationships or bystander intervention, you want to be talking stalking as well. And so we have programs you can pick up and lead with scripts and slides and videos. We have discussion guides on every season of the TV show You from Netflix. The final season one is just in approval right now. Those have been popular on campuses, and a lot of kind of grab and go tools so that you can incorporate stalking education into your existing programming. We are not a direct service provider, so please don't send victims to us at Spark for help. because we'll just have to send them back somewhere local. But we do have resources that y'all can share with victims. For example, we have these brochures on understanding stalking. You can order these for free on our website in English and Spanish. And you can put your local information here. So, if you have something to hand your survivor of intimate partner and sexual violence, make sure you have something for your stalking survivor as well. We also have fact sheets, infographics, documentation logs, handbooks translated into 10 languages, just a ton of resources on our website, and webinars like this one. So if after today you're like, I wish I could hear Dana talk even more, you are in luck, my friends, because we have an archive of recorded webinars and we're called Spark. So I got us to call it the Sparchives. So that was like the height of my career. So you can check us out in the Sparchives anytime. We also have recorded e-learning modules that are short and interactive. And follow us on social media. Our handle on there is at Follow Us Legally. If you get our sick sense of humor at Spark, we will not be scared. We want you to follow us. Um, and sign up for our newsletter. As an anti stalking organization, we will not contact you excessively or without your consent. So you have to actually opt into our newsletter. And it's one we send around quarterly. It's not one of those you're getting all the time. So I hope that you will connect with us. So, our focus today is on risk assessment and safety planning, but just to want to make sure that we are kind of grounded in a shared understanding of what stalking is, because the reality is that stalking so often is not reported and is not identified. And so, why would you do a risk assessment for stalking if you're not seeing a stalking case in front of you, right? And so, I just want to kind of quickly review and or introduce, what is stalking, and what are some of the risks that we're worried about when we think about a stalking case. So, in terms of what is stalking, well, depends who you ask, right? Are we talking about the behavioral definition, your statute, and stalking's a crime across the board, but every state and territory has a different statute, or it could be a specific organizational policy. And so we have a map on our website with every territory and their stalking statute and some interpretation of that statute. So I definitely encourage you to see what your local laws are. That's a really important thing to do. But today I'm focusing on the behavioral definition. And that's because that tells us what stalking really is and what stalking really looks like. And regardless if there is or is not a parallel criminal justice process happening for a stalking charge, we still want to know when it's stalking so that we can react with urgency and engage the right safety planning tools. So, behaviorally, stalking is a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear for the safety of others or to suffer substantial emotional distress. So, to break that down a little bit, it's a pattern of behavior, also known as a course of conduct in most stalking statutes. So, you might hear me use those terms kind of interchangeably today: pattern of behavior, course of conduct. I'm talking about the same thing. It's two or more behaviors that make up that pattern. It's two or more behaviorally, and in most territories and states, I think there's maybe two states that require three or more. So, and those patterns can be, those behaviors can be quite varied. So let's say I'm stalking you because I'm the worst guest presenter ever, okay? So maybe Monday I text you, Tuesday I'm mad you didn't respond, I smash your headlights. Wednesday I feel a little bad about that, so I send you flowers. All of those are stalking behaviors, right? So stalkers often combine behaviors that are crimes on their own, like that property damage, with other behaviors that may not be criminal on their own, but can become criminal in the context of a stalking case. And so that's confusing because it's not illegal to send someone a gift or to text somebody or call somebody, but it is illegal to stalk somebody. It's also confusing because our system tends to be pretty incident based. Our officers are responding to a call for service. And for our victim service providers, we might be focused on, well, what brought you in today, right? And our victims might be telling us about a specific incident. So I encourage you as a responder, no matter what your role is, to kind of zoom out and be thinking, is this an isolated incident? Is it part of a bigger pattern of behavior? Because your victim who's telling you about, say, their smashed headlights may or may not think to automatically disclose to you, oh, I think I know who did this, and they've been texting me a lot, and I've been getting weird letters in the mail. And I found this camera. Do you think it could have been them who planted it, right? They may or may not think to just automatically disclose that because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this one incident. But it needs to be what we're talking about because it's letting you know this is not isolated. It's part of a bigger pattern of behavior. And often different behaviors are reported to different sources, if they are reported at all. And no one's connecting the dots and seeing, oh, this is a whole course of conduct, not individual actions. So it's a pattern of behavior. It's directed at a specific person or people. So if you had, say, a peeping Tom looking in a locker room, that might still be a crime, but that's not really stalking because stalking's directed at someone specific. That being said, we often see what we call target dispersion, or you have, say, maybe an ex-husband is stalking his ex-wife. She gets a new boyfriend. Okay, so now he's stalking the ex and the ex's new romantic interest. And of course, our stalkers are trying to get access to and information about their victims. So they're likely to reach out to a victim's family, friends, colleagues, and others. So a lot of folks can be involved and even considered co-victimized in a stalking case. But we still see that behaviorally as directed at a specific person because they're trying to get to that victim and they might use other people to do it. And it would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. So, fear is really important to understanding stalking. It's what separates it behaviorally from a victimization it's often confused with, which is harassment. And the difference is that harassment is typically behavior that is demeaning, disrespectful, creates a hostile environment. And it can be quite serious, so I'm not trying to minimize it, and it might be your better charge depending on the situation, but it's not necessarily scary. Stalking is scary. It is about fear. Um, so, fear of what? Well, it includes fear of physical violence as well as emotional distress. So, emotional distress is also about fear. It's not a touchy-feely thing, but it's recognizing that fear may be of outcomes in place of or in addition to physical violence, right? You might be afraid of losing custody of your children. You might be afraid of never having a safe or private moment again. You might be afraid that intimate images will be released and that you'll lose your scholarship because it'll violate the terms of that scholarship and now your whole life is ruined. So, people experiencing emotional distress don't just feel annoyed or frustrated. They generally feel that they're under surveillance, that their life is being invaded, that they're being sabotaged, that they're being threatened. The best quote that I saw about it was a victim who said, "It's like he's taken my life without killing me." So that sense of I cannot live a normal life because of the interference of the stalker. Stalking is important to know about because it is criminal, it is traumatic, and it is dangerous. So, like I said, it's a crime across the United States, including at the federal level. And it's traumatic. Many stalking victims experience mental and physical health issues that can be short term to lifelong, including anxiety, depression, post traumatic stress disorder, and suicidal ideation. And something that's perhaps a bit unique to stalking is that sense of anticipatory fear, that sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And stalking survivors feel like that sometimes for years. In fact, the average duration of a stalking case, not the high end, the average duration is 2 years. And 10% of cases last 5 years or more. And so you can imagine that constant looking over your shoulder, wondering when this person will come back and what they'll do, the kind of anxiety that provokes, and the kind of hypervigilance that often results. Many lose time from work, 1 in 8 lose some time, about half of those lose 5 days or more. And stalking survivors are not always a protected class of worker, so they might lose their job entirely. And quite a few relocate. This really shocked me when I learned this, that 1 in 7 stalking victims move. So think how annoying it is to move when you want to move, right? Even if you're excited about moving, it's stressful, it's expensive, it's not something you do because someone's kind of annoying you. We have 1 in 7 victims relocating to get away from these offenders, which I think helps to illustrate how traumatic and consuming this victimization can be. And stalking is dangerous. It often co-occurs with physical assault and sexual violence, including but not limited to rape. 1 in 5 stalkers use weapons to threaten or to directly harm their victims. And in 76% of intimate partner femicides, so that's murder of a female partner by a male partner, in 76% of completed and 85% of attempted, there was stalking. the year prior to that homicide or attempted homicide. And yet, so often these stalking behaviors are dismissed and minimized as, oh, it's texting, it's following, it's annoying, but no one's really getting hurt here. And that's simply not true. In fact, this wonderful researcher we work with, Patrick Brady, went so far as to say that stalking is homicide in slow motion. These behaviors and tactics adding up and escalating over time. Now, I'm certainly not saying that every stalking case escalates to the point of violence or homicide, right? That's not accurate. What I am saying is that every week I read cases of violence, attempted violence, homicide, or attempted homicide. And at that point, often responders are looking backwards and saying, oh, look, there's this whole history of stalking victimization here. Often that was reported to multiple sources, but not handled with the urgency needed. So we don't want to do that, right? We want to identify the stalking while it's happening and intervene then, because the stakes truly could not be any higher. Here's a more recent study reinforcing that same lethality risk. It is one of the top 10 risk factors for intimate partner homicides. It's a threefold increase in risk. Stalking is also an indicator of other kinds of violence. So, this is a study of women with protective orders. So, all have been abused, all have protective orders. Some were abused and stalked. For the women abused and stalked, they had higher rates of all the harms listed here. Everything from verbal abuse and degradation to physical violence, serious threats, sexual assault, threat with a weapon, attack, and injury. So, when there is abuse and stalking, higher rates of all of these as well as sexual violence. About a third of women stalked by an intimate partner were also sexually assaulted by that partner. And in addition to sexual assault itself, there's other kinds of sexual violence they experience at higher rates. So I'm not saying that stalking causes homicide, causes sexual assault, or causes violence, but I am saying it's an indicator. It's a red flag that when you see stalking in any relationship, but particularly with these examples, with these studies, in an intimate partner relationship, which is where most of our stalking research comes from, that should be a big red flag that this abuser might be particularly dangerous. This person might be particularly threatening and violent, more likely to engage in sexual assault, um, and even homicide. So we want to name stalking when we see it. Stalking is a very prevalent victimization. In the United States, nearly 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men are stalked over the course of their lifetime. And these rates are very similar to if you look at the studies around intimate partner or sexual violence. And yet again, it's very under-resourced and doesn't get a lot of the same kind of attention. All sorts of people can experience stalking and do, unfortunately. We know that women are more likely than men to be stalked, and that the majority of victims report the offender's male. That's true regardless of the victim's sexual orientation. It's true overwhelmingly for our female victims. Over 80% of the time, their offender's male. But it's also true about half the time for our male victims. About half the time, their offender's male. So what's going on with that? Well, sometimes it's an extension of power and control from a same-sex relationship, and sometimes it's that target dispersion I mentioned earlier. Say again, you have an ex-husband stalking an ex-wife, she gets a new boyfriend, now he's stalking the new boyfriend as well. That's not all men stalking other men, but that is a big piece of it. So when I look for pictures of stalking, which I do because I'm fun, okay? This is the kind of stuff I get, the kind of images I see. So if you can tell me in the chat, what does this tell us about who stalkers are? What do you notice about these images? Creepy, yes, and visually creepy, right? Um, Absolutely. There's anonymous. I agree. I think there's a lot of that hiding or disguising. A lot of hooded figures, a lot of facelessness. They all look male, yeah. Um, it suggests a stranger. I agree. So you get a lot of these kind of shadowy figures. And if you look at the settings, it's a lot of like alleyways and basements and kind of these like lurkers in the bushes who are very visually scary. Like I like this person in the middle left that's wearing a mask and a hoodie and behind a computer, but did not cover their webcam. Right. So you get the sense of these kind of creepy strangers, very similar to what you might see under the myth of the stranger rapist, right? And I'm sure it won't surprise you at all on this call to know that this is not accurate, that actually the majority of the time, victims know stalkers, stalkers know victims. And again, I'm sure y'all are like, of course, I know that already. But the reason I bring this up is because most folks don't. When most people think about stalking, this is what they're thinking of. Or they might be thinking about like a secret admirer because we see that trope in TV a lot. Or they might be thinking about an obsessed fan stalking a celebrity, often who's kind of delusional, right? Because that's a lot of the stalking news that we see. And all those things can and do happen, but they're by far the minority of cases. And so the challenge is you have victims saying things like, oh, that's not a stalker. That's just my ex having a hard time getting over things. Um, but again, surprising zero people on this call, that's a major category of stalking offender, right? So if we look at this breakdown and we have female victims in green, male in blue, about a third to over 40% of the time, the stalker is a current or former intimate partner, right? Is an extension of power and control from an intimate partner violence relationship. So that's a really big piece of it, that intimate partner piece. But I also want to make the point strongly that if, okay, 30-40% of the time the stalker is an intimate partner, that actually means 60 to 70% of the time they are not. They might be an acquaintance, they could be a stranger, though it's relatively rare. They might be a brief encounter, like, oh, I think they work at that coffee shop, or I saw them at my friend's party. I kind of know who they are, but I don't really like know them. It could be a family member or a person of authority. That could be a supervisor, academic advisor, someone with some kind of power over the victim. So I encourage you to think about for you and your partners and the services you offer, are you identifying stalking in every kind of case, intimate partner and not? And are you serving all victims of stalking? And so if you aren't, do you know where to refer them? And if you are, would they know how to find you? Because if I'm being stalked by, say, um, an estranged friend and there was never a sexual or romantic relationship, why would I Google family violence services in my area? Right? That's not very intuitive. And yet, that's where the folks like you are who could help me with all of these kinds of situations. And so I encourage you to think about, you know, things like, is the word stalking on your website if you offer services to stalking victims and survivors? Do you have the brochure on your shelf if you have ones on domestic and sexual violence? Are your staff trained on stalking, etc.? And so we have a checklist of fun questions like that, so you can be the most popular person at your next staff meeting, to think through your response. But some of these are really low-hanging fruit because so often these stalking survivors just don't know where to go. It's important to recognize the diversity of victim stalker relationships because misconceptions around this really impact reporting as well as our response. Because victims rely on what a real crime looks like when they think about reporting, right? So if you look at like these images, who here looks like a stalker? I'm going to go with Mr. Trenchcoat. But who is more likely to be a stalker? It would be that ex-partner or current partner or a strange friend, right? And so the repetition of this trope and misinformation has real impacts in terms of reporting. Um, and it's a little tricky because I think for a lot of folks in our field who are coming from the domestic violence space, so when we think stalking, we think intimate partner. And our general public, when they think stalking, they think stranger. And so we're both only seeing part of the picture and we're kind of walking past each other, right? So we need to see the whole picture here. Now, all stalkers can be dangerous, absolutely. But when you're thinking about, risk assessment with broad strokes, you want to be thinking how much access or information about this victim does the offender have? And so generally people who know or knew the victim better are more threatening and violent. And so you'll see, while again, all stalkers can be dangerous, absolutely, our intimate partner stalkers on average tend to be the most threatening and violent, followed by acquaintance, then private stranger that's kind of, a random person, or a public figure like a celebrity. Um, that being said, I wouldn't get too hung up on these categories, and here's what I mean by that. Like if you might have a victim who says, "Oh, we met on a dating website, but we didn't hit it off romantically." Or we hooked up a couple times, but really just friends. Is that an acquaintance or an intimate partner? I don't really care, right? I think what matters is how much access or information about a victim does this person have? Because no one uses the term intimate partner besides us, right? No one's like, oh, come over for dinner. You've got to meet my new intimate partner. And so I think it's more about, again, the access, the information, and how committed that offender seems to be to continuing their course of conduct. And like I mentioned, these checklists on our website just to think through what are the services we offer for all stalking victims, and are our staff trained up on recognizing and responding to stalking across the spectrum of different relationships where it can occur. All right, so to talk about risk assessment in a little more depth, of course, we want to caveat this with risk assessments are great. And this is a quote from the author of the risk assessment we're looking at. And even she is saying, hey, victim perceptions of risk are a strong predictor of reassault, equal to or even better than risk management tools. In other words, if you go through a risk assessment and it says low risk, and you have a victim and standing in front of you shaking with fear, there's probably something that didn't capture, right? There's probably something there that they know that we don't. There's really no better risk assessment than a victim's own fear. So we want to take that really seriously, regardless of whatever tools we might use to help us assess that our reporting. So today we're going to be looking at the Stalking and Harassment Assessment and Risk Profile, or SHARP. And you might use some risk assessments in your work already, like LAP or Mosaic. And all of those are great, but most of them don't really speak to stalking victimization specifically. And this is an assessment that is focused on stalking risk. And as you'll see, because we're going to go through it with a case study, it'll create a narrative report and risk profile as well as some safety planning suggestions. Of course, that doesn't replace your individualized safety planning with a victim advocate, but it can be a good place to start. So Sharp's going to be asking about the diversity of stalking behaviors because a lot of times when folks think stalking, they think surveillance. So you might get imagery of like binoculars or a camera or someone peering through a window. Um, and while a lot, that's true that surveillance is part of a lot of stalking cases, it's not the only thing because if you think about it, the definition of stalking, anything scary, that's not the first thing that happened, could be a stalking case. And that's a wide variety of behaviors. And these categories overlap and intersect, and that's fine. It's just to kind of expand our thinking. And so when we get to this case study in just a minute, you'll be wanting to think through which things have happened and what category might they fall under, because we're going to see examples of stalking that fit these different categories. So surveillance is pretty much what it sounds like. How is the stalker tracking, following, watching, gathering information about the victim? That could be using technology, right? Like they plant a camera or access one that's already there. They put a tracking device on a vehicle. They know someone's password, so they read their private emails, or they just watch what they're doing on social media. I think it's also important to note that most stalkers who use technology are also stalking in person. So good old-fashioned showing up, driving by the home, looking through the trash, looking through the mail, and proxy stalking, which is a fancy way of saying asking third parties for information. So it might be asking that mutual friend, hey, are they going home for Father's Day this year? Do you know what they have planned? Or are they going on vacation this summer? And sometimes that third party has no idea they're helping a stalker, and sometimes they do. So we see stalkers continue to stalk even when incarcerated because they might send a third party to, take a picture and send it to me, give them this message, etc. So all of these are powerful forms of surveillance. Could also be life invasion. How are they showing up with the victim's life where the victim doesn't want them to be there? And so that could be unwanted contact. Most of us have our phones with us all day. And so it's across platforms, across applications. They're texting, they're calling, they're on WhatsApp, they're on Snapchat, they're commenting, they're upvoting, they're downvoting. You sit down to do your job, they're in your work email too. Just this constant trying to get to you, trying to get to you, trying to get to you. They might show up in person or leave signs that they've been somewhere. So a common stalker tactic is to break into a victim's vehicle or home and not take or break anything, but just leave some sign they've been there. So maybe they leave a can of soda that's the brand they know the victim knows the offender likes to drink. Or they move a lamp they one time argued about where it should go. And so when the victim gets, let's say, home, they know that offender's been there. But they're like, what am I going to do? Call the police and say someone moved a lamp? I'm going to sound crazy. And offenders know that. That's why they engage in that behavior. In fact, 1 in 5 victims report that exact thing. A stalker breaking into vehicle or residence and just leaving a sign they've done so. Um, could also be that showing up in common in public or semi-public spaces. A lot of that, like, since when do you go to this grocery store? Since when do you come to our kids' soccer game, right? Public humiliation and spreading rumors. So when you enter a room, people already have a sense of what, have misinformation about that victim and what's going on with them. And harassing friends and family. And so many victims say, hey, when it was just me, fine. But now that they're talking to my family, my friends, my new partner, like it's really not okay. Intimidation, that could be explicitly or implicitly. How are they intimidating that victim? Those could be threats that are sometimes explicit and sometimes implicit. So it might be a threatening gesture or a crushed can, or we had a case where an offender kept breaking into the victim's home and slicing her underwear with a knife. So the kind of symbolic sexual violence. Could be property damaged, forced confrontations. Like they're outside my apartment building. If I want to leave, I have to go through them, right? Threats to harm oneself, that's really scary to our victim, and threats to victim about harming others, family, friends, pets, etc. And interference through sabotage or attack. What's actually changing in the victim's life? How is their life being sabotaged? How are they being interfered with? So that could be financial, work, or academic sabotage, right? They're moving money around in accounts. They're calling customer service and saying, guess who gave me terrible customer service? They're showing up at the workplace. And so the boss says, this is a nuisance. You got to go. Ruining reputation. And I think sometimes with those people can feel like that sounds not so serious, like it's gossip or something. But we see some really scary and inter sabotaging kinds of rumors our offenders are spreading. For example, there was a case where an offender had made AI images of a victim that were pornographic in nature and then wrote a bunch of rumors about what she liked sexually. Every time this victim applied for a new job, he was also watching her email. So then he would see that she applied for a job. He'd follow up with that potential HR manager with that image and those rumors. So that's beyond like, oh, people gossip, ruining reputation, right? That's really scary and it's interfering with her life and sabotaging her ability to get a job. And she's being approached sexually and doesn't know why, etc. So we often see that kind of um, rumor spreading and or impersonation online as part of a stalking case. Could be road rage, or of course, interference might be property damage, very tangible interference, right? They slashed my tires, I can't get to work. That interfered with my day. They changed my password, I can't access my accounts, or a physical or sexual attack. So when we look at the SHARP assessment, it's looking at these 14 risk factors in stalking cases. It's looking at the big picture. How long has this been going on? What are the behaviors, right? What have we seen happen? Does it seem to be escalating? And are there any triggers coming up? For example, a court date or the anniversary of divorce or something like that. What is the nature and context of the threats? Are they specific? Are they vague? Are they in person? How are they being communicated? And do we think our offender could follow up and is capable of following up on those threats? The stalker mindset, as much as we can tell, how is the victim resisted? How is the offender persisted? So the victim changed their phone number, the offender found a new one, right? Their motive, which can be really hard to assess, right? We know that rejection is a powerful motivator for stalkers, but when I see a text message thread that's like, I love you, I miss you, I hate you, I'll kill you, like, what are your goals, right? I think that a lot of stalkers would have a hard time articulating that. And proxy stalking, are they involving third parties? Their history, if we know it, right? Do they have a history of abuse towards the victim or to others? Do they have access to firearms or other weapons or any sort of specialized firearms training, say military or law enforcement? And do they have a criminal history, mental health issues, or substance abuse disorder? And we'll talk about that more in the assessment. And victim vulnerability. Stalking's about fear, so what are they afraid of? How is this impacting their life? Do we think this offender is particularly tech savvy? And what are some vulnerabilities victim might have, right? Is it unsafe housing? Is it that they are low income, right? Is it a mobility issue where they can't physically get away from the stalker quickly? What's going on in that victim's life? And so what we're going to do now is watch, this is about a 10-minute video, and it is a shortened version of a 48 hours episode, so I apologize, it jumps around a little bit, but tells a story of a stalking case escalating. And so we're going to watch this, and then I'll actually pull up the risk assessment and we'll go through it together, answering it as best we can from the information we got from the video.
Angela was a mother and a grandmother.
She was.
What kind of mother and grandmother was she?
I don't know that you would find somebody better than her. You hear a lot of people say people put their kids in front of themselves. That was truly her.
Angela Pritchard's world revolved around family, especially her 2 sons and 6 grandchildren.
They were the loves of her life, her kids and her grandkids.
Look at how high we are.
And with almost equal billing, Angela's 5 huskies.
She always was an animal lover.
Angela's sons, Josh Close and CJ Hancock.
She was beautiful inside and out. She liked to make everybody happy, especially her family.
She loved you so much, yeah.
She loved to spoil the grandkids rotten. They could do no wrong in her eyes.
She loved doing arts and crafts. She still decorated her tree with the ones we made when we were kids.
And making memories with their mom later in life was Chris Pritchard, the very man investigators were now chasing. Wendy Buddy and her husband Jim had known Pritchard for years.
I would have trusted him with our children. He was nice, friendly, sincere, a hard worker, fun to be around.
Pritchard, a longtime Bellevue resident, was an established electrician in town. Soon, Angela found her calling.
To be a kennel owner, to do something with animals. I was thrilled for her. It really seemed like everything was falling into place.
After dating for nearly 2 years, they moved into this Bellevue home and even got married here in March 2019. The newlyweds were over the moon for about 8 months.
When did things change?
I truly think that things started to change when he lost his job. He got fired.
Fired and charged with first-degree theft, a felony, after he allegedly stole $36,000 worth of supplies from the electric company where he worked.
She was just beside herself. What are we going to do now? We need that income.
Awaiting trial, Pritchard was out on bail and out of work, says Wendy.
He wasn't looking for work. He was definitely drinking more. As the months went on, it just was like, wow, he's really kind of changing.
Pritchard finally took some odd jobs and helped Angela at the kennels. But in the summer of 2021, Wendy says Angela discovered her husband was using methamphetamine.
And then I knew that things are really getting bad.
The simmering tension reached a boiling point on April 18th, 2022.
She said, Chris hit me.
She said, he's drunk, he's on drugs. So I told her, we're gonna call the cops.
Bellevue police responded. The call recorded on police body cam.
He hit me and I came in the house.
She was crying. She was visibly shaking. She had a mark on her face, and she said, I'm so scared.
Police didn't have to go far to find Pritchard. He was in the garage.
State of Iowa law requires that somebody goes to jail on physical domestic.
I can't believe I'm going to jail.
Well, she got a mark on her face.
Chris Pritchard was arrested and charged with domestic assault.
He's very, very, very messed up on drugs. Yeah. We've seen him change right in front of our eyes, haven't we?
Chris spent the night in jail and was released awaiting trial, staying with family. Angela sought and received a temporary no-contact order.
So he can't come back here.
No.
The no contact order now exists, protecting your sister. But a few weeks later, it's lifted.
Even after it happened, she said, I don't want this. I want our marriage to work.
Each had been married before, but had hoped this would be their last marriage, says Wendy. Angela withdrew the no contact order.
I believe he said everything that needed to be said for her to drop that order. The drinking will stop. He will be home more.
Promises he failed to keep, says Wendy.
She said, I'm scared of him, especially if he's been drinking.
Wendy says Angela was furious when she found a tracking device in her car and 2 hidden cameras in the house.
I told her, you need to get a divorce. You need to be done with this, Ange.
Dozens of Angela's brightly colored sticky notes told a dark story. The scribbled entries became Angela's diary of domestic abuse.
August 23rd text message, calling me names, saying it's going to get real ugly. He's been stalking me and watching me. Very scared of him. I think Chris is capable of anything. Booze and drugs every day. Said he doesn't give a if he goes to jail. Always looking over my shoulder to see if he's around.
Her words to me are, I'm done. This is it. We're not living in the same house.
Wendy invited her sister to move in with her. Angela gratefully agreed.
I was like, you have a shadow now because I'm not leaving. You're stuck with me.
The next day, Angela requested a second temporary no contact order, granted September 1st, 2022. A no contact order means just that, no contact of any kind with the protected person. In the state of Iowa, a single violation requires a mandatory arrest. But that doesn't stop Chris.
No. Once that second no contact order got put in place, I would say that's when things went really downhill.
And it was in place when Angela went back to the home she once shared with Chris Pritchard to pick up a few things, says Wendy.
I was with her.
You were with her along with police.
The Bellevue police were there just in case Pritchard showed up. The court had ordered him to move out temporarily.
We walked in the front door. The house was destroyed. There was ink and paint thrown everywhere.
Picture frames broken.
Furniture was destroyed. He had actually taken the mattress off her bed and rubbed it in dog feces.
Guns, and he placed them all over the house to intimidate her.
I mean, we both just started crying.
This is in clear violation of the restraining order. What do the police do?
The police said there's nothing we can do. This is his house.
There's nothing we can do is what they say to you.
This is his house as well.
Under Iowa law, with a no contact order in place, Bellevue police should have taken Pritchard's guns. But for reasons unknown, he was allowed to keep them. Wendy and Angela's sons say throughout September, the frightening violations continued. Not physical assault, but psychological terror.
Sitting outside of her house, following her, texting her, stalking her, going and cutting the grass at the kennels while she wasn't there.
Bellevue police arrested Pritchard just once on September 15th for sending Angela a text message, another violation of the no contact order. He spent one night behind bars before posting bail. The next day, says Wendy, he resumed his flurry of offenses.
He had been driving by our house multiple times.
One night, says Wendy, Pritchard drove by 6 times in 1 hour.
I don't feel safe anymore anywhere. My sisters, my house, my sons, stores in town.
You have a ticking time bomb on your hands.
Yeah, but pretty much, and that's what it felt like.
Starting September 1st, 2022, when Angela's second no contact order was issued, until her murder 37 days later, Chris Pritchard violated the restraining order repeatedly, says O'Brien.
A dozen times during this relevant time period, Angela Pritchard called the Bellevue Police Department, and they failed to follow that law, that judge's order. I've heard people say that no contact orders aren't worth the paper they're written on. And in this case, that was true, but I firmly believe that they are worth something, but they have to be enforced.
Said that they'd tell him to knock it off or have a talk with him. Nothing was done. And she was terrified.
You have no idea what I go through every single day with him. No idea.
I remember her saying, I don't know what else to do. I don't know where else to turn.
It's been getting worse, and it's been getting worse. I don't want him anywhere near me.
You're describing a life lived in fear.
Yeah. Every time she was out of my sight, I was so scared for her.
9 days before her murder, the Jackson County attorney warned the Bellevue Police Department in an email Chris Pritchard had 24 hours to turn himself in. If he does not report, I will be requesting a warrant. I wanted all of you to be aware, as I'm afraid he might try to do something tonight. The next day, when Pritchard failed to appear at the county jail, the arrest warrant was issued. Ryan says Bellevue police could have protected her by finding and arresting Chris Pritchard, but they never did.
Is it hard to find Chris?
Shouldn't be. Everybody knew his Jeep. Had a customized tag that said 0 dark 30 on it. So you can't miss it.
Right. So we obviously have a scary case here, and they've already let us know, unfortunately, that it does escalate to the point of homicide. But at this point, what I'm going to do is pull up, and I will share on my computer the stalking and harassment assessment and risk profile. So you can get to this a few different ways. You can go right to coercivecontrol.org. You can also go through the stalking awareness website, since you're always on there anyways, because there's so much good stuff, and go right to risk assessment and click on the sharp assessment. And so I'll go through this kind of quickly, and you might disagree with some of the answers I give, and that's okay. It's really just to illustrate what the questions are. Of course, generally we would defer to the victim, right? We'd be sitting across from our victim, and they'd be giving us the answers, but we have to do a little bit of guessing here, since unfortunately we can't talk to Angela. And so this gives a little bit of background information. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do, and it lets you know you need to save it right away. When it creates the report, this isn't storing the reports anywhere for anyone else to get. It lets you know it's not going to tell you what to do, but that it's meant to be a tool, right, to help. So I'm going to lie and say we read everything. Okay, what kind of situation is being assessed here? Well, we have a male offender, and if someone could just confirm in the chat that you can see the screen, just to make sure. Oops. Okay, great. So that's Chris Pritchard. I believe he was 56. Our victim, that's Angela Pritchard, female, and she is 55. So what's the relationship? So as you can see, this is not only for intimate partner stalking. Here we have an ex-partner, but it could also be an acquaintance, professional, other, online only, stranger, or I don't know who's doing the stalking. Now, generally, stalkers want the victim to know who it is. They might make it hard to prove who it is to hold them accountable, but usually victims do know who the offender is. That being said, even if they don't, obviously there's limited actions we can take, but they can still start here with doing this assessment. Who's answering the questions? This is something victims can do on their own. Someone who's concerned, like a friend or family member, or I'll be generous and say we're professionals. So I'll say we're a case manager. Is this about a real case? Well, yeah, this case is real, but we're just testing this out, right? So you can also do this before you show it to your colleagues. Where is this taking place? So this one all takes place in Iowa, in the Bellevue area, but there's often jurisdictional issues with our stalking cases, right? Like I live in the DC area, but I'm in Maryland. If I drive 20 minutes, I'm in DC. If I drive another 20 minutes, I'm in Virginia. So if I visit a friend in Virginia and someone followed me the whole way, where did the stalking take place? Well, that's at least three different statutes that we're under. And so it can get really jurisdictionally complicated. The good news is that if any of the incidents take place in your state, then the stalking can be charged in your state. Um, so here our options are no, yes, or suspected. So the standard here isn't could we prove this in a court of law today? It's just what do we think is going on? Has he been tracking, following, or monitoring her? Yes, we know that because she's found the cameras, because he's been driving outside the home, etc. Has he invaded her life with unwanted contact, made other unwanted intrusions? Yes. And look, it's our favorite categories. This is surveillance. Here's life invasion. Um, Intimidation. Has he intimidated or scared her through threats, property damage, or harm as a pets or other means? I'd argue yes, because while he hasn't, to our knowledge, said, I'm going to hurt you, he left guns around the home, etc. Um, has he directly interfered with her life, like humiliating her, jeopardizing her job, interfered with her housing for sure? So I think we'll have to say yes there. Has he physically or sexually assaulted her? Yes, we know he physically assaulted her at least once, right? Has he ever kept her from leaving, caused her to have an accident, assaulted others? Not that we know of. Oops. Okay. So this asks about how long it's been going on. I think this went on for about 6 weeks. I could be wrong. And so I'm just gonna do my best guess and put in a date from, mid-March. Often victims do remember when it started because they might say, oh, it was the day that that it was my sister's birthday party and we're going to brunch, or it was, my mom's birthday or whatever. But if they don't remember, that's okay. They can do their best guess. And then this does the math for you, which I appreciate. And so you can say, yep, that's right, or no, that's wrong. So question, wouldn't it be federal if they are crossing state lines? Yes, and it won't necessarily be charged at federal level, if that makes sense. So yes, but often it comes down to a state choosing to take it on versus it being a federal case. So that's the duration. Here's the intensity. Um, is he contacting her more than one way? Yeah, sometimes he's texting her, sometimes he's driving by, right? He's doing different things. Um, does he bother her at more than one location? Yeah, and what I'd like to point out is, and they mention it pretty quickly, but that he goes to the dog kennel and he's mowing the grass there. And so that's one that's really contextual in nature, which is an important thing to recognize that a lot of these stalking behaviors are really contextual in nature. Someone on the outside might say, oh, well, that's nice. Your ex is doing you a solid and helping mow the lawn. But for Angela, who is trying to get away from him, who is trying to create distance, to know that he's been there and left a sign he's been there by mowing the lawn at her workplace, right, is actually very threatening. Has his behavior increased in frequency or severity? Yeah, it does seem like it has. Um, because he is becoming, and they said that, right, with the second no contact order. How frequently is this happening? So this is hard to do without talking to Angela. We'll just have to do our best to guess. It's asking in a typical month, how many days are these different behaviors occurring? In a typical month, how many days is he making unwanted contact? It sounds like most days when I think back to, those post-it notes. So I'm going to guess 30. How many days is he directly approaching or confronting her? Probably fewer. I'm going to guess 15. How many days is he interfering with her life? I'd say every day at this point, right? Because she is calling the police over a dozen times. She's living in fear. She's living with her sister because she doesn't feel safe at home. How many times have they broken up? There's two that we know of. And you might have heard the statistic that it takes an average of 7 times for a victim to leave an abuser. Well, what's that about? Not always, but often it's about stalking, right? That continued extension of power and control, creating more barriers to leaving the relationship. And so, unsurprisingly, our victims of intimate partner stalking tend to have more separation attempts. than are victims of intimate partner violence who aren't stalked. Now this asks, hey, have any of these happened? This is asking more about the behaviors. Has he done things that felt threatening but were not direct threats? I'd say yes, especially with the house, right, and the guns and the mattress and all of that. Has he threatened to hurt or kill her? Depends how she took those threats, right? Those implicit threats. I'd say no, he hasn't directly said that to our knowledge. Has he described in detail how he would do so? No. Is he stalking other people? A little open to interpretation. We know he's going by the sister's home, but I think that's because Angela's there, so I'll say no. Has he threatened to destroy property, harm pets, or sabotage her other ways? Not that I know of. Has he threatened her with a gun, directly or indirectly? Yes. Has he threatened to harm himself? Not that we know of. Has he ever made a threat and then done that exact thing? Not that we know of. And is he sending third parties to stalk her? No, not that we know of. What's the impact, right? What kind of impact is this having on her life? Is she afraid or concerned for her safety? I'd say extremely, right? If she's saying she lives in fear. Is she worried about the safety of others? It's not mentioned as much, but I have to imagine with the children or grandchildren, that she's afraid. Has she made significant life changes for safety reasons? Yes. And this is something you always want to ask about when you're working with a survivor, because often survivors don't necessarily say, I'm being stalked, I'm feeling afraid. That's a very vulnerable thing to admit, right? In this case, Angela is using that language. But often our victims won't say that. They'll say something more like, my ex is being creepy, my neighbor's being weird. And so asking what they've changed can really help to show the impact on their life. If they're saying, oh, I'm not that scared, but I change when I work, so I'm only working the day shift so that they don't come by when I'm working at night. And I change my phone number, I block them, I stop sharing my location. I'm living with my sister now, I don't feel safe at home. Like, these are all indicators that someone is indeed afraid. Does she believe he's capable of harming her or others close to her? Yeah, she must feel he's capable because she doesn't want to be near him and she's scared. Is she worried about financial or social impact? Um, Probably. That's not really mentioned as much here, but we know he goes to the workplace, for example. Has he been notified that the stalking's unwanted either informally or formally? Yeah, there's a no contact order in place. Has he ignored the no contact order? He certainly has. Is there a court order? Yep. And is he violating it? Yes, he is. Has he been controlling, jealous, or violent towards her or others in the past? Um, we don't know about others. We know about the one incident of domestic violence, right? And so I'll say suspected. We know he's been violent with her and controlling, certainly now he is, but we don't really know the details. Has he ever threatened or used a weapon on her, strangled her, severely assaulted, or sexually assaulted her? We don't know. And we don't know how severe the physical assault is. Again, I'm not trying to rank that, but we kind of have to ask Angela. Does he have a criminal history, drug or alcohol problems, or mental health issues? Yes. So he has a few of these, right? He has the criminal history now because of the robbery at work. And we know that he has a drug and alcohol problem. He is drinking all the time, and he started using methamphetamines. I do want to address this mental health piece because often people frame stalking as a mental health issue. And I'll get this question quite a bit in trainings where people are like, well, stalking is a mental health issue, right? Like, this is something's wrong with the stalker, this is a mental illness. And kind of the good and bad news is generally no. More research certainly needs to be done, but most stalkers do not have any kind of mental health issue, right? They're not bipolar, schizophrenic, delusional, etc. It's fair to say, like, well, this isn't a healthy, good thing to do, sure, but in terms of, is this a manifestation of a mental health issue? Generally, no. It depends what study you look at, right? And more research needs to be done. I'm not saying that psychosis can never overlap with a stalker and their behavior, but it's generally not the cause. And so, if you think about if someone said to you, like, domestic violence is a mental health issue, you might be kind of like, right? Like, oh, there's contributing factors, but no, that feels icky to me. That's how I feel when I hear people say stalking's a mental health issue. It's like, I'm not saying there's no relationship at any time, but it's much more complex than that. And generally, stalkers are choosing to stalk and they want to scare their victims. Um, and it's about power and control, not about mental illness necessarily. Has he been suicidal in the past? Don't know. Does he have guns, obsessed with weapons? Yes, we know he has at least a gun, right? And I'd say here, something that our director always points out is in areas where a lot of folks have access to firearms, which is a lot of places, this is outside the scope of this risk assessment, but it can also be helpful to ask how the firearms moved, right? Whereas the gun unloaded in the shed and now it's loaded in the nightstand, because that's going to give you a lot more information than just, is there a gun, yes or no? So I thought that was a good insight to pass on. Does she think he's using technology to stalk her? Yeah, she found some cameras, right, and a tracker. Do we think he feels rejected, humiliated, or degraded in some way? I'd have to say yes, because it's escalating after the no contact order. Do we think he wants revenge or blames Angela for ruining his life? It's unclear what he wants, for I think. I guess I'll say suspected. And does he seem unconcerned about severe consequences? Yes, if you recall, she even says, like, he said he doesn't care about going to jail, right? And he's doing all this in violation of the no contact order. Are there upcoming events that are she's particularly worried about, like a court date, etc.? Not that I know of. Does she ever feel like she sent him mixed messages? I don't think so. Does she think he knows he's bothering her? Yes. These behaviors aren't ambiguous, right? It's not like, oh, he sent flowers. Maybe he meant it in a nice way. It's like, no, you didn't rub the mattress and dog feces in a meant to be nice way. Like, obviously, the things he's doing are upsetting and threatening. Does she ever feel bad for him because he had a bad life or whatever? Don't think so. And those are interesting questions because they might just affect how our victim interacts with our offender. Has the behavior been reported to anyone? Law enforcement, but also a lot of times victims don't know, um, like necessarily who law enforcement are. So they might say, I told the police, and then you drill down, and then it's, oh, you told the bouncer at that bar, right? That could still be a good witness, and it still means they were scared enough to tell an authority figure. Does she feel there are no consequences for his behavior? Yeah. And are there things in her life that are making her more vulnerable? I'd say the unsafe housing, perhaps. Let's see. Two. They definitely live close to each other. And here, and then on the next page, you can put anything additional, right? Say, um, it's a mobility issue. It's, anything low income, anything like that. The offender's a supervisor. And so you can add things there, and then that is it. So it might have felt long watching me sit here and type, but it actually doesn't take all that long to go through. Um, and so, as you can see, it asks for the course of conduct, right? Has this happened? Has that happened? It asks for her level of fear, and for some basic information, as much as we can ascertain it about his state of mind, right? And what's going on. And so, and you can always put I don't know, right? In almost all of these, there's a I'm not sure option. Also worth noting that, we're doing this at a certain moment in time. These cases are dynamic, and so you might need to repeat this risk assessment next week, because just because they haven't, say, come to the house yet doesn't mean they won't, right? And so um, something could change. And this case, of course, does change from maybe the first time she reported it up to this moment when we're doing the risk assessment. All right, so this should take just a second to load, and if it fails, I have a backup plan, don't worry. Oh yeah, there it is. And I'm seeing folks here kind of speculating in the chat about, Chris's state of mind. Frankly, I don't know, and honestly, I don't care that much. I don't think I'm in the position from this video to psychoanalyze him, so I'm focusing on his behavior. But I think there often is an impulse to, um, remove blame and say, well, something was really wrong. He was choosing to engage in these behaviors, right? And the behaviors, he is responsible for the behaviors that he engaged in. And so from a psychotherapy perspective, sure, maybe there's something else to unpack there, but I don't feel qualified to. I just kind of have to focus on what he did. Um, okay, so here's what this gives us. It gives us a narrative profile. So I won't read this to you or anything, but I want to point out that it is short, right? It is less than 3 pages long, and it really chunks out the information. So it's saying, okay, here's what's going on. Here's how long it's been happening, how intense it is, how frequently it happens. Here are the kinds of threats. And it says, okay, he hasn't directly threatened her, but he has left objects and done these other things. She is extremely afraid, right? She's made significant life changes for safety reasons. Um, Here's how she's resisted. Here's how he's persisted. He knows that the behavior is unwanted. He is violating the no contact order. He knows he's upsetting her. A little bit of context: he may have been physically violent in the past. He has a criminal history. He has drug and alcohol problems. We know he has guns. We know he uses technology. And then this looks at those 14 risk factors and said, here are, in this case, we have 13 out of the 14 risk factors assessed. And then it tells you what they are. So the fact that his behavior is increasing in frequency and severity, the fact that he's threatened her with a gun, that she's really scared, that he's been notified the behavior is unwanted and continues, that she feels her home is unsafe, etc. And so these are the risk factors that it's identifying. Now, in addition to that, it also creates some safety planning suggestions. So I'm going to share this with you. Hold on one second. Okay. And so this is really directed more towards Angela, and it's encouraging her to take what's happening very seriously. So it's telling her, hey, see what's happening, right? Don't downplay it. And it also tells her what the risk factors are and why they might be scary. So, for example, okay, the fact that he bothers you in multiple locations, um, you might want a safety plan around those locations, right? But also the longer the duration, so that he's already assaulted you, it's likely he'll assault you in the future. So it's giving a little bit of an explanation of like, why are we worried about these things? Right? Now that this boundary's been broken, he might break it again. Um, we know that he's using technology that increases the risk of violence, etc., right? Evidence. It encourages her to save the evidence. So to document everything, and it gives her some strategies for how to do that, like what is helpful to document, and then to create a safety plan. And so it encourages her to listen to her instincts, to trust her instincts, and to seek local services, right? So to seek that local support. And so if you can tell me in the chat, how might this be helpful um, in the work that you do if you're working with a victim? How might going through this assessment and looking at this report with them, how might this be helpful to your work? Or are you like, it wouldn't be? Why did you show me this? Let me just pull up the chat here. Yeah, shows lethality risk, right? It puts it there kind of in black and white, which I think is really helpful. And you can safety plan more comprehensively because it's capturing the whole course of conduct, right? Because we say like, oh, ask about all the behaviors, ask about everything going on. Um, what are all the questions to ask? You don't have to memorize them. They're in this risk assessment, and they're going to ask about a wide variety of behaviors. Legitimizing those fears. Yeah, absolutely. I think that goes a really long way. This is not coming from, your mom who's too worried or your touchy-feely victim advocate. No, you put some information into a heartless computer, and what came back was you have these risks and it's scary. It's right there in black and white. That can really validate a victim's fears and or be a real wake-up moment for them, right? To say, oh, yeah, I guess really a lot has been going on, because we know that victims often minimize their experiences. And so this kind of pushes back on that a little bit. Um, and yeah, it's yes, that is taken serious. I'm just reading what you're saying. It's not just bothersome, right? That this really is an issue. And I'd say as well as for collaboration, obviously with victim a confidentiality, privacy, consent in mind. But so often with stalking, there's a lot going on. It's, there's different parties, know different pieces of information. So to approach, say, a law enforcement officer and say, or to petition for a protective order with, here's the story, like, here is the bare bones, what's going on here, in addition to a list of events to say, big picture, this person's being stalked, they're under surveillance, they're terrified, here's how long it's been going on, and to be able to share that information quickly and get people literally on the same page can go a really long way. Because often it's hard to explain what's going on. By the time victims come in for help, they might be kind of scattered. So much has happened. It's been so traumatic. They don't remember the order, etc. So to have a succinct way and a compelling way to explain that to a judicial officer, to police officer, to an advocate, etc., could be a really powerful and helpful tool. So for all those reasons, I agree. I think it's really helpful, as well as giving something a little more concrete in terms of that risk assessment. So it's not surprising here that the victim is in danger, right? And so we're going to see how it happened in this case.
There was police officers there, and I remember walking up to them, and I said, is she alive? And they said no.
In that moment, did you know it was Chris?
100%. 100% I knew it was him.
Some of the first video that places him on this property comes from this home over here?
That's correct.
Investigators reviewed the footage starting at midnight, the day of the shooting. For hours, there was nothing to see. But just after 4 a.m., there was something to hear.
You can hear dogs start to bark. We had determined that was most likely the point when he arrived at the kennels.
Henningsen believes Chris Pritchard entered the kennels and lay in wait for nearly 4 hours.
The first video that they really got was Angela coming down to work in the morning. And right up here, you're going to see Angela start to pull down to the entrance at the Mississippi Ridge boarding kennels. Pulling up to the kennel at 7:34, you can see her get out of her vehicle, and she's gathering her belongings and then walking into the kennel itself.
Angela Pritchard had less than 6 minutes to live.
At 7:39 and 43 seconds, we hear a gunshot go off in the video. There was a 911 call in the morning.
Tell me about that 911 call.
911, where's your emergency?
It's essentially you're listening to the end of her life on the 911 call.
Please, get out of here. Just, I have customers coming in. Please.
911.
Can you please get out of here?
Okay, where are you at?
I still to this day have a lot of, I guess it's guilt, because I think in my mind, what if I would have went with her that day? Maybe I could have saved her. But part of me was so proud of her for being as strong as she was in that time. She named her killer. And so she helped bring him to justice.
Chris Pritchard's life sentence also helped bring her family some comfort and the courage to move forward. They believe Angela would want them to make this public plea.
Maybe other police departments that maybe are a little lenient on stuff won't be so lenient next time.
So obviously a really tragic case, and I'm certainly not saying, oh, if they just use the Sharp assessment, this never would have happened. Of course, it's more complicated, and what we know from the case from this video points out more systemic issues with responding to stalking. So, I'm not pretending, oh, this would have solved everything, But I do think it's an example of, it's a really tragic and too common example of that escalation of stalking behavior, how these behaviors that seem minor might add up to be more than the sum of their parts. Driving by the house, mowing the lawn, sending the text message, right? These different things, there's a cumulative effect to these behaviors that's really scary. And that her is justified, that she knew he was scary. She knew he could be violent. And unfortunately, she was right. And so, having something like the sharp assessment and connection to a victim advocate to make some detailed safety planning, I think could have at least been helpful. And that didn't happen in this case. So I hate to show you something so upsetting and then be like, moving on, but just for time, I kind of have to do that here. But some big picture tips on responding to victims and safety planning, and we'll talk about Angela's case within that. So, anytime a victim reports any kind of harassing behavior, consider, could this be a stalking case, right? Is this an isolated incident? Is it part of a bigger pattern of behavior? We want to think about that first contact. And I know this says law enforcement, but this is true for anyone, any responder, right? If the victim continues to work with you is really very much about that first response. And something that I'd often tell law enforcement is, even if you feel there's not enough at this time to say make an arrest or do anything, you can always take a report, validate the victim's fear, and let them know where to go next and connect them to victim services, right? It feels really different to say, nothing I can do, come back when someone tries to hurt you, than to say, you were right to call me. I'm glad you came in. This is really scary. I can understand why you're scared. I'm going to connect you with victim services. I want you to keep a documentation log, and here's you call if anything else happens, right? Those feel different. And so we need to be trauma informed in how we're talking to our victims. Have resources on hand. Who in your area is helping survivors of stalking? Let's make sure we know what services they offer so that we can refer them right away. Preserve evidence now, take that screenshot now, right? And give your victim realistic expectations. These cases can take time to build, right? And to get the response they want if they're going through the criminal justice system. And so, let's be thoughtful and realistic about that. Recognize victims cope different ways. All of these are normal human ways to respond to a stalker, but some of them might be more or less helpful in dealing with the situation. Um, for some victims, their instincts to move against the stalker, like, oh, you're stalking me? Cool, you're going to jail, right? They're going to call law enforcement right away. You're going down, you're not getting away with it. Others have the opposite reaction. They move inward. They might be thinking, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. This is embarrassing. This is personal. I don't want to put anyone in danger. And so they become really introverted. They don't talk to anyone about it. They withdraw. Others move away. That may be physically relocating, as well as anything that creates distance, right? I turned location off on my phone. I stayed with a friend. I changed my routes to and from work, right? I blocked them on everything, things that create distance. Um, and others do the opposite, move towards the offender to try to appease them. Oh, you want to talk to me every day? I'll call you once a week, right? Trying to kind of negotiate. And some move outward, move to folks like you who can help, and that's great. By the time they've done that, they've probably already tried some of these other things. And so it's worth asking them what they've already tried and what's working and what's not. One piece of advice I want to address is this move away advice. Now, this is really common advice given to stalking victims. They're often told, change your routes to and from work, change your phone number, block them, right? Relocate, change your name, all those kinds of things. Um, and that can be helpful because offenders do see any contact as reinforcement, right? So if the offender calls 100 times and the victim picks up and says, "Stop it, I hate you," tomorrow they're calling 101 times because that was a win for that offender. That being said, that move away advice is not always really possible or realistic. So, like, let's play this out for a second. Let's say I'm stalking you and I love to call you. Okay, I'm old school, I'm always calling you on the phone. And eventually you're like, I am so over Dana calling me. I'm going to just change my freaking number. Like, I cannot with her. And so one day, I call and it says this number is no longer in service. Am I, the stalker, going to be like, oh man, I guess I'll stop stalking and become a productive member of society this day? No, I'm already stalking you. I know where you work. I know where you live. I know your Instagram handle, right? I might actually escalate my behavior because how dare you? So I'll go back to this. But it can be really tempting to tell victims, we'll just log off, block them, do all those things. But that could actually escalate the situation because how dare you? You've taken away my favorite way to stalk you. And so it's both. You want to recommend no contact with the stalker because of that intermittent reinforcement and recognize that may not always be possible or realistic. It might be that keep your enemies closer. And what victims have said is, okay, if I block the offender, maybe they can't see me. I can't see them either. So I'm not going to get that text saying I'm coming over so I know to leave, or see a post that they're out of town so I can relax, right? And the victim put it to me like this once. They're like, if you're being stalked by someone, I'm sorry, if you're being hunted by someone, don't you want to know where they are? Kind of hard to argue with that. So again, this is messier, right? It's much cleaner, especially from a criminal justice perspective, to say I blocked them, I drew the line in the sand, then when they cross it, it's really clear. That's helpful to know and helpful to do, and it shows that resistance and persistence, right? I changed my number, Dana found my new one. I blocked them, they emailed me. But did that make the victim safer? Maybe, maybe not. And so you really want to ask your victim how they think the offender will react to these changes, right? To creating that distance. So again, I'm not saying don't create the distance or do create the distance. I'm saying there are pros and cons. It depends on that particular situation. And you want to talk to your victim about what will and won't work. Now, most victims take some kind of self-protection protective actions. I'm not saying victims should or should not make these changes. I'm simply saying many do. Almost 80% take some kind of self-protective action. And so ask what they've already done and what's working and what's not working. And again, this is also evidence of fear and distress, right? That they're making these changes. It shows how scared they are. And if the offender's persisting, it shows that resistance and persistence. People often ask me, do protective orders work? And in response, I have this unhelpful slide that's like, sometimes. So about half the time, our offenders are very responsive to that. Those are our offenders who, oop, I don't want to get in trouble, right? I've gone too far, I'm out. But then you also have offenders like Chris Pritchard who they don't care how high the consequence gets. They're just going to continue with the behavior. And of course, having that no contact order or protection order, whatever it is in your area, can also escalate the behavior. It's great because it makes it an arrestable offense when they show up. That can be really helpful and protective to a victim, but only if it's enforced. And we saw in Angela's case, it really wasn't enforced, right? And so again, it's not an always or never, but it's something to weigh with your victim and survivor. And also note that if there's are rules or practices in your jurisdiction where no contact orders are mutual, they often are. I've seen cases or protective orders dropped because it came out that the victim contacted the offender. And I think more education needs to be done on that because they might just trying to be negotiating their safety and taking the temperature of the situation. For example, there was a case where it came out that the victim had called the offender at 2 a.m. and they talked for hours. And so this was in court, and the defense is like, well, how scared can she be? She's so scared. Why is she calling him, right? And so it came out that the victim said, yeah, I knew he got off work at the bar at 2 a.m. I could hear him leave, get in his car, drive home, and fall asleep, and I could talk him down. So I knew he wouldn't come over, break my windows, um, wake my kids up again, right? That's perfectly reasonable safety planning. And so that's sometimes what needs to happen. In terms of what is safety planning, it's that individualized plan looking at specific strategies and interventions. We're talking about practical ways to decrease risk. We're talking about connecting victims with a variety of services, agencies, and individuals focused on physical and emotional well-being, right? Our systems are confusing. A lot of victims say they had no idea they were entitled to say, housing or victims compensation, or all of this is very confusing. Who qualifies for what? Who do I talk to here, right? And so making those connections is really important. I think a helpful place to start is this: what have you already done? What do you need my help doing? And what are you not willing to do? Recognizing that safety planning is inherently unfair to our victims. It's often asking them to make their lives smaller to stay safe. And it's that balance of safety and freedom that's so difficult. And so, and their lines might be different than yours, and that's okay. You might say, well, I think you should get off this piece of technology or like this certain app. And for you, that wouldn't be a big deal. But for the victim, they might say, that's my whole social life. There's no way I'm going to stop using that app, right? They're allowed to say that. They're weighing their safety versus freedom. You want to trust the victim's instincts. Have a planning evolve, just like the risk assessment needs to evolve over time because these cases are dynamic. You can't read the future, but try to consider what the stalker might do next. Think about what information and access they have. And again, that balance of safety and freedom, definitely easier said than done. Um, Ask stalking victims what they're afraid of, because you can't necessarily resolve all of these fears. But for example, if they, like a quarter of stalking victims, are really afraid of losing their freedom, then telling them, here's what you got to do: you're going into shelter, you're going to shut it all down, don't talk to anyone, don't leave the room. Okay, now you are reinforcing the fear, right? And so, you want to think about what are those fears and how can you address what that victim's actually particularly worried about. And that providing some information can go a long way in not solving the situation, but at least giving them more: here's what stalking often looks like, here's what they might do, here are things to think about. Now, I know I'm just out of time here, so I'm just going to wrap up pretty quickly in the next couple of minutes, and then I'll stick around for questions if folks have them. Um, in terms of safety planning, very similar to domestic violence safety planning in terms of the practical steps, right? If the victim's willing to share what's going on with others, then great, let's have more eyes on the situation. Sometimes creating that distance can be helpful, documenting everything, etc. Um, And I'd say too, with safety planning, I think what's helpful is to really break it down into manageable pieces because these cases can be so big and overwhelming. But asking questions about what the problem is, what would help, and what you can do to help. So, for example, you might have a victim who says, well, one problem is they show up when I'm at work. Okay, is there anything that makes that better or worse? Well, yeah, it's worse when I work nights because then they're off work, so they show up. Okay, would anything improve that? Yeah, it'd be better if I only work the day shift. Who has the power to change that? Well, my supervisor, they set the shifts. What would they need to make that change? Well, I think a call from you or maybe a copy of the protective order would be pretty persuasive. Okay, great, we can do that, right? Next. And granted, not everything has that need a solution, but let's break it down into really practical things. We often tell victims to document, but we don't always tell them how. And so we have people like Angela, which is not to blame her in any way, but with, pages of all these sticky notes that I don't know if an officer is going to really look through. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. So being really succinct: date, time, what happened, where did it happen for those jurisdictional issues, as well as if technology was used, what platform, because getting evidence from Facebook is different than WhatsApp, is different than Snapchat, is different than Google, right? If there are any witnesses, excuse me, if there's evidence attached, and if they made a report to anyone. Um, Even if they might be calling the police department over the county line and they're not sharing information, they might be calling campus police, campus security versus your sworn officers versus whatever. And a lot of times information is not shared the way that victims assume it will be when they report. And even if they do indeed call the same police department every time, they might have a different responding officer. So when they get that call about someone's mowing my lawn at work, they might kind of roll their eyes. But if you can really drill down into, you know, sorry, into like, wow, I completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I was trying to read the chat and go to see police officer. Oh, if you can show them, sorry, this list, right, and let them know hey, this is just the latest thing that's happened in this whole list, and you're just the last person I've talked to. Here's all the other people I've talked to. Look, it's burdensome for victims, it's a lot, but it's helpful because these incidents add up, but they only add up if we do the math. So something like this can be really helpful. Of course, what we need most of all is coordination. The reality is, after this just over 90 minutes, with apologies for running over, um, you now know more about stalking than most people in our field. This is the reality of the situation. And so it really needs to be you, in whatever role that you play, helping walk victims through this imperfect system that frankly is not set up for stalking cases. It's not set up to be multi-jurisdictional, multi-year, highly contextual, right? And so we really need everyone together on this. We need our awareness educators to make sure our general public knows what stalking is. They take it seriously, that when they tell that friend or family member, that person sees the urgency and helps get them to the appropriate help. We need our service providers to identify stalking and safety plan around it uniquely, recognize the increase of likelihood of violence, including sexual violence and homicide. We need our law enforcement to charge it. We need our prosecutors to pick up those charges and argue them effectively. We need our courts to sentence it appropriately. We need our probation parole officers, who are often left out of the conversation, to continue to hold those offenders accountable and keep our victims safe. When any of that doesn't happen, we lose victims. And typically, when I see cases like Angela's, it often comes down to a lack of coordination and a lack of urgency. And we all have a role to play in building that urgency and helping get victims through this imperfect system. Couple of resources to help you do so. Um, Victim's Voice app is it's an app that's a documentation tool that some victims have found really helpful. Victim Connect's the closest thing we have to a stalking hotline. Still connect all victims of crime with local resources. Stalking Awareness Month is in January, so if you're making some noise for April and October, make sure you do January as well. We have a ton of stuff on our website to make it really easy to table, to hold an event, to attend a webinar, etc. Like I mentioned right at the top, we have these print resources you can order from us, in addition to a ton of stuff you can print off our website. And speaking of our website, you know what, you love it, stalkingawareness.org, where we have all sorts of information. And for folks for whom this was your first stalking training, definitely recommend getting into those e-learning modules, watching Context is Key, and doing a deeper dive on what is stalking and how does it intersect with intimate partner and sexual violence, since today I did a pretty quick overview of that. At least to me, it felt quick. Maybe to you, it didn't. Here's my information. I just want to thank you so much for your attention, for having me on, and for all of your great participation in the chat. I know it's easy for me to sit here and say, hey, think about that, use this tool, right? But you're the ones who are actually on the ground helping keep victims safe. It is all easier said than done, and I totally understand and respect that. So truly thank you for the work you do, and don't hesitate to reach out for further training, for one-on-one assistance, for resources you're not seeing on our website. Let us know. We're here to help. That's what we're here to do, and we're usually free of charge. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you all so much.